modern workforce is demographically very different from what we've seen it to ever be. If you look at the different dimensions across which we'll have a very diverse workforce coming and joining our companies over the next decade and beyond, you can categorize them primarily into the demographic of the workforce that's joining. By 2030, we're going to have about 10 to 12 million people joining the workforce every year, predominantly in white-collar jobs. The way that the social context from which they come, the cities, the tier 2 towns, the backgrounds from which they come, as well as the cultures that they represent are going to be way more diverse than they've been. There's going to be less of a homogeneous mix of people joining the workforce for typical jobs. The academic backgrounds of these people are going to be different. They're also going to be more multi-generational. You will have people doing different jobs across different age groups that are not necessarily representative of the way business is being run right now. The second is the technology adoption. A lot of these millennials, post-millennials, or Gen Z as you call it, God knows, 10 years from now you'll have Gen Alpha again, right? They really are digital pioneers. They're going to be technology-led first. They've pretty much been, brought up with having social media tools being an integral part of their, grown-up phase, right? So they're going to be way more comfortable with them than we've been ever during our, years that we've been growing up. So they're going to adapt to that with much more comfort. They're going to be much more comfortable also with giving up a semblance of privacy for more convenience. I think there's definitely a shift in that direction. And it's also going to be a generation that's always plugged in and always on. It's not necessarily a good thing. If you look at the statistics even now, there was a survey done for which cities in the world actually have the most number of hours being worked by professionals. And not a surprise, it was India with Mumbai topping that list. Mumbaikars on average work somewhere close to 3,300 hours a year. It's quite an abysmal figure. And I'm pretty sure other Indian cities are not that far off. Just for reference, the second global city on that list was Hanoi with about 2,600 hours. So there's a 25% difference over there in the number of hours that Indians are typically working. But this is going to be a generation that's always going to be plugged in, always switched on, and therefore the way that they need to be engaged, the environment that they need to operate in is going to be very different from what we are currently providing. And the third is the work habit. As a result, people are going to be populating cities more. The design of the office space itself is going to evolve. You won't necessarily have one central business district or one office. You will have disaggregated setups where companies are going to set up their operations. And employees will actually want flexible working hours and flexible working locations. They're going to be globally collaborative. That's a very important facet of how businesses are being built right now. And all of us in our regular day jobs are experiencing this global collaboration increasing every week, every month. And the last is the switch cycles of these millennials and post-millennials is going to be far faster than what we are seeing right now. That's basically moving from one function to the other. If I was just to kind of show a character sketch of what the modern workday currently is, or the traditional workday has been and what it's gravitating towards, it was you and I getting up, rushing to work, trying to get some multitasking, doing some multitasking on the way, trying to get some meetings done, a few phone calls depending on traffic. It always started with not necessarily the most productive hours till we reached the office. In cities like Bombay, Bangalore, where the traffic's horrible, you're pretty much unproductive for an hour and a half while you're commuting to office. Once you got to office, you had a little bit of a siloed infrastructure in terms of cubicles. The shift is happening already, but predominantly a lot of the working spaces right now continue to be a representative of that image right there. And then you had traditional workplace tools in the way that employees communicated. And last but not the least, when employees needed to go out for meetings, there was a traditional infrastructure of either expensive office cabs that were available to them, or they had to hail cabs on the street and then go through a tedious process of expensing and claiming back those costs. The modern and the future workplace is going to be different. People no longer will require to actually attend office and clock in at 9 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning to actually start the day. It's going to begin pretty much by them having access to remote login facilities. You'll have various tools that allow you to actually take, be part of Zoom calls or take interviews or be in meetings, on the fly. You also have open collaborative infrastructure now that's becoming more mainstream. And of course, messaging tools, email tools, like Slack, Flock, Workplace by Facebook are becoming the new normal in a lot of different companies because that's what really is the future of, workplace communication. And lastly, how do employees travel? It's becoming, with the advent of app-based travel services, it's becoming much more democratic. They're not having to be dependent on somebody booking cars for them. They're able to actually take control on themselves. And also, it obviates the need of expensing and wasting time for all employees to actually put in reimbursement claims, et cetera. So it's becoming much more convenient. It's becoming much more liberated. And it's becoming simpler. So while there is a challenge for companies who actually want to, I'll pause here for a second. While there's a challenge for companies who want to move from the top to the bottom, there could be challenges in terms of costs, in terms of change management, in terms of some of the inertia that the organization will go through. It is for those companies that actually take this and look at it as an opportunity that will actually differentiate themselves as a place that really is going to facilitate the best talent to want to come there and work at, right? So this is an opportunity for all of us in this room to make sure that we look at what are the different dimensions that you can address to make our respective workplaces, almost talent magnets. So how do you do that, right? Is there a cheat sheet over here? Well, not exactly, but I do have, a few ideas that I'd like to suggest. Before we get to those, if you just look at, companies that have already gone down this journey, right? And there have been some companies that have been early adopters of this, and they've done a good job in terms of saying we're going to evolve to become to have the future workplace, ready within the next couple of years. We want to be ahead of our peer group, et cetera, draw the best talent towards us. Some of the companies, if you look at, the two axes over there, their adoption has been high, right? They're the ones who've been early adopters. They are the ones who've actually gone broken the mold and said that we're going to integrate some of these modern practices in our workplace. But then if they've not invested enough in their employees, the employee adoption is low. And let me just talk about few reasons why that happens. And this may be, it may resemble a few of, our workplaces right here in this room, and it may resonate with you. The tools that they deploy in the guise of trying to modernize the workforce or the workplace are esoteric. They're difficult to interpret. The second is lack of employee training. You've got the infrastructure, you've got the softwares, you haven't trained your people enough. There is too much of embedded controls. You've got something really, cool and, modern, but you still can't let go of the old ways of having an expense report vetted by a manager and then approved, right? There's less controls that you're giving over to the employees. And there is inertia in employees to learn. On the other side, you've got companies which haven't invested so much, but they may have an employee and a workforce that is a little bit more proactive. So while the employees, their adoption curve is faster, it's faster than the adoption curve of new technology by the employer. That is very dangerous, in fact, because these are the employees that will get frustrated and possibly look out for different pastures, right? You want to avoid that. And why that happens is basically, there's low appetite for change management at the company's end. There is lack of appreciation of technology and what it can actually bring about in terms of cost savings, convenience, and being a better place, a workplace, versus the costs incurred. The employee voice is low. So even if employees are voicing this, that these are best practices they observed, management doesn't listen to them. Or the companies wedded to legacy systems. They just find that this is the way things work and we don't really need to take proactive measures to change things. The target place quadrant, it's a no-brainer where all of us ought to be and our organizations ought to be, is right there, right? So what are the workplace tools? What are the workplace characteristics? What is the archetype of that workplace that we need to navigate to make sure that we are in that quadrant or at least moving deliberately towards that place? Let me create a small little framework here. There are three pillars really that will help all of us to tune into what constitutes a modern workplace. I've simplified this between the three pillars being the first is the workplace itself. The second are the work tools that are deployed by the workplace. And the third is how do employees travel for work? Because that's definitely one of the most common experiences that employees have, whether they're commuting to office or they're commuting for meetings, to airports, et cetera. So let's go through each of these one by one. So the first, let's talk about the workplace. By definition, the workplaces of the future are going to be more open and collaborative. I think it's a no-brainer. We've seen this happen across our offices. There is a deliberate attempt for even some of the traditional businesses to become more modernized. There is definitely, you've got people that are getting access to more information, more collaboration, more knowledge in such environments. And you're getting access to a different crowd if your workplaces are more attractive. In terms of companies that have exemplified this, we've seen several Indian companies as well, including Office, 91 Springboard, and of course the large international ones like WeWork. And a lot of companies are not only occupying offices, they're shifting lock, stock, and barrel to these, they're choosing to open their second office in a WeWork or in an office space. So they're trying to experiment with both and then taking a call on whether they are seeing discernible benefits of moving to an open, collaborative office space. The second is consistent and connected. I think one thing that the workforce really looks forward to, especially in a lot of the tech companies, I mean, you may think it's a Silicon Valley phenomenon, but it's not. I've seen a lot of startups in India, completely leapfrog the way that office setups have been, and they're very collaborative. They give the liberty to people to actually work from home. They just have remote login tools that make sure that people are as efficient and productive as they would be in an office. And some of the founders have actually said that our costs have been a little bit better. The productivity hours have been better, especially in cities like Bangalore and Mumbai where people are stuck in traffic. And that can only happen if, as a company, you've embraced some of the productivity tools that enable your employees to do this. Zoom for remote video conferencing, remote login, various. These are all people management softwares as well as video conferencing softwares that are used by various companies across the world. The second, let's talk about some workplace tools. So this is interesting, right? This is all about delivering the weekend experience at work. If you look at some of the most successful enterprise B2B technology players of late, it's not necessarily the traditional companies that you and I have grown up working with. It's a lot of the B2C companies that are huge global forces in the way you and I are daily using them and consuming them in our personal space. So you'll see companies there like Facebook, Google, you'll see LinkedIn. These were all B2C companies first. And they've evolved, they've realized that there is a huge potential in exploiting the familiarity quotient that users have to extend the same to a B2B environment where users will actually prefer using a setup that they're familiar with rather than getting into a more laborious and a little bit more difficult to interpret legacy systems. And companies that, that have been able to focus on this, companies that have been able to evolve, even the traditional ones are doing better, but some of the legacy players have moderate to low focus on user experience, and they're the ones who are kind of struggling to keep up. The third is work travel. And I think over here, all of us, we came here for this conference. It's part of our work day, right? It's not personal time. But really, how convenient was it to get here, right? How convenient were the processes that have been made by your company for you to have local level, last mile connectivity? I'm not talking about a flight. I'm usually talking about, say, ground transportations, right? How easy are the processes that your companies have made for you to book that car, to book that, even including a flight, actually? Is it still encumbering? Is it still dependent on an external party or your admin teams? Or do they actually give you a greater latitude of control while ensuring there is enough processes and policies in place and checks and balances so that it doesn't get exploited, right? So how do you make it more convenient? How do you make simple, quicker processes, but at the same time making it easier to administer and control? The second is the core employee experience, right? Are you able to use this from any device anywhere? Do you have to always log into a computer, to a system, through a VPN to be able to access the software for booking different things for your company and then, get hold of that cab or not? Is it hassle-free expensing? A lot of us are actually most unproductive when we have to go back and put in those, expensive seats, whether it's a Starbucks coffee, whether it's an Uber ride, or whether it's, anything else that was expensed along the way. And the last is safety. I think this is becoming predominant in terms of both an employee and an employer, in terms of what is front and center for them when they choose the workplace tools that are available to them, right? So it's a highly critical parameter. We want to make sure that duty of care enhancements are provided to employees, and this is great not just for employer branding, but it's really essential as well when you want to be a place where employees focus more on work and less on worrying about things. And a few brands below that are mentioned over there, they resemble some of these new age capabilities that have been delivered and lapped up by several companies, small and large, and there's several others like this. Let me continue. While we're on the topic, the last couple of slides over here, I'm going to go a little bit more in detail on the future of business travel, and I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about Uber for Business over here. If you look at the way business travel used to be managed, it used to be an inefficient experience, right? I spoke a little bit about this, predominantly because of the tedious booking process and the dependencies and the clearances and the approvals required. There was always an administrative burden for the company to carry this out, all right? Right from having to sign up with so many contractors, having difficulty in maintaining consistency standards, safety standards, as well as complex vendor management. And the third is, it was a financial headache. There were audit issues, there were issues of reconciliation, issues of the time wasted and the costs incurred over expense report submissions. All of us have been there, missing receipts and then the tons of email that flow between finance and admin back and forth. So how do the modern workplace tools deal with this, right? So essentially what they do is they liberate employees to make sure that it's a seamless experience right from the booking of the car to a seamless, hassle-free, automated expensing that goes through without having to really expense and settle any claims. The second is easy travel management. You can pre-book the conveniences at really your fingertips, as well as, there's more transparency both for the employee and employer. And the last is increased savings, right? This may or may not, be necessarily top of mind for employees, but as employers, it definitely is. A lot of employees also are conscious. They take certain, bookings and they know that this is not necessarily in the interest of the company, and therefore are becoming much more vocal in terms of opting for services that they, in their mind, are doing the right thing by the company, right? So they're becoming more fierce advocates for companies to have access to these services that save for the company. So in terms of Uber's journey, like how does Uber really, feature into this? What we did is we created an enterprise suite about 5 years ago when we realized that the same pain of transportation, ground transportation that you and I felt when we were moving for our personal, requirements was also felt by employees of corporates. And therefore we built a layer of features on top of the traditional Uber application that you and I use. What it does is it gives access to companies, to employees to be able to book Ubers directly on the company's account, and the company can create several policies to regulate that. Business travel, which is, and these are the different products that are on offer. And similarly, they could be our competitors, they could be, other partners. There are a bunch of these. I can only give you examples of what Uber does. So therefore, I'm showing it over here just to educate everyone on this. Business travel is typically for employees to move around. Eats for businesses, when you and I are moving out, for meetings, it gives you an ability to order from different eating applications and charge it back to the company directly. And the company can create different eating programs and then give different accesses to employees based on their seniority, et cetera. And the second, which is pretty interesting, is it's not just restricted to employee travel. If you look at businesses are in all kinds of different interactions with different stakeholders. You could have employees who have to move, you could have your guests who come in who need to be moved around, and you could have multiple stakeholders like your customers if you're in a retail establishment or a hospital. So there are tailor-made products that cater to each of this. Central is a central concierge service where somebody can book on your behalf, right? You don't have to be the one who creates those orders. Vouchers, I hope you've gone to the U4B booth over here and seen the QR code. You can configure vouchers and distribute them amongst your employees, amongst your guests, amongst your customers, predefine it, geofence it, lock it, whichever way you want, and give, again, democratizing the ability for them to choose when and where to travel. And the last is health. This is a much more compliant product for patient transportation. So there's so many, the future of work travel, why I'm showing this is because work travel itself is so nuanced, and there is so much that is being innovated in each aspect of what we constitute as the three pillars to liberate and modernize the workforce. So in conclusion, as employers, we ought to think of the three pillars and what modernization of technology, which is basically adopting the latest tools that we have, can we deploy, how soon can we deploy, and importantly, how much can we train our employees so that we are in the right quadrant across our workplace, across the work tools, and across the work travel, which is, in my opinion, the three most frequently the frequent moments of truth that an employee has in an employer place. And if you crack that, you will build a workplace of the future that has the right cultural context, attracts the right talent, and provides the right productivity output for the workforce. Thank you.